Good evening, I'm Greg. Welcome to my channel, Midnight Oil Software. In this live stream, I'm going to be doing some Unity game development. I'm going to be working on my retro classic Moon Patrol rewrite that I'm doing. In my previous stream, I added the background elements and added a scrolling parallax background effect and some background music, which hopefully is still working since our last session. I just already noticed something that I didn't cover last time. In the video last time, I added a bunch of stock UI elements that I've written that are common across all the levels of my game. And one of them is this level banner. And so you'll notice when I play the game, this level banner drops down, and you'll notice that it says Stage 1 Space Hamsters. So that's because I never changed it in my level banner script here. So I'm going to call this Egg Patrol and Minigames. And so hopefully now when it drops down, Egg Patrol Minigames. So that works. I don't like the fact that it's displaying behind the other elements there. So let me see if this will fix that. No, not quite. So the scoreboard is displaying in front of it. And it's still displaying in front of it. Well, I will address that later. I don't want to waste time in this video working on that. What I want to do first tonight is I want to add terrain to this game. So in the previous video, I showed you the artwork that I had done for the terrain. And I'll just drag this into the scene here, and you can see I've got this little piece of, it's basically just ground that's kind of bumpy on the surface. And the idea here is I want my buggy to bounce as it rides over this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a bunch of terrain tiles, and they're going to go all the way across the screen here, and they're going to scroll as the buggy is moving. And as they scroll off the screen, new ones will spawn at the end, and it'll be one long, never-ending, endless scrolling line of terrain. So the first thing I want to do is, as I drag this into my scene, you'll see that I've got a sprite renderer that has my normal terrain image, and that's all fine. I want to assign it to a layer, though. I want to create a terrain layer, and that's because I want to handle what can collide with it. And I'm going to also use that to determine whether or not the buggy is grounded, because when you click the jump button on your buggy, you only want to jump if he's grounded onto the ground. And so I'm going to use the layer for that. So I'm going to come in here, I'm going to create a layer, and I'm going to call it terrain. And while I'm in here, I'm going to create one called hazard. And that's going to be for the crater that we're going to add later. So I'll come back in here, and I will assign this to the terrain layer. Okay. So there we go. I'm going to create a prefab from this because I'm going to use it to spawn the terrain tiles. So under my prefabs folder, under minigames, I want to create an Egg Patrol folder in here. Actually, I think I'm going to keep this under minigames because I might want to use this terrain tile in other minigames in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that there, and I'm going to drag this in as a prefab. And so there you can see I have a prefab called normal terrain. And so if I was to delete this and drag it in here, you'll see it's in the same position and everything. It remembered all of those settings. And it still has the terrain layer. What else is this going to need? It's going to need a polygon collider. And it's a 2D polygon collider. And if I was to click this, you can see that the collider follows the contours of the image pretty closely. Good enough that it's going to give us the bounce that we want. And I'm going to want to add a script to this as well. So let me go under scripts, minigames, and I'm going to create a new C# script. And I think I'm going to call this ScrollingTerrain. And I'm going to select my normal terrain here. And I'm going to drag that scrolling terrain onto it. And I'm going to apply this to the prefab. So now, once again, if I delete that, go back into my prefabs folder, and I drag that in there, you can see there it is. It's got my script, it's got the collider, everything that I would expect to be in there. Just check the chat, make sure nobody has asked me anything. What else am I going to want to do for that prefab? I think that's it. I just need to look at the script now. What do I want to put on that script? Let's open up the script. That's interesting. Okay, now you want to put this in the mini games. Is that the namespace? Oh, I didn't realize I capitalized games and mini games. Okay, so that is a mono behavior, which is correct. It's in the right namespace. What am I going to want in this? I think I'm going to want some serialized fields. You all don't need to be looking at my ugly mug while I'm doing this. Actually, do I want any serialized fields? Maybe I don't need them to be exposed in the instructor. So the first thing I'm going to want, I know I'm going to want a scroll speed. And I'm not really sure how fast I want this to be, but I'm going to default it to 2 units, and I want it to scroll to the left, so -2. I know at some point I'm going to want a reference to a terrain spawner, but that doesn't exist yet, so we'll leave that there. I think I'm going to want to cache my transform. And in the awake method, and this may not be necessary. I'm doing this because I'm not sure if I'm going to be accessing this in the update method, and I'm not sure if Unity already caches the transform on the game object, so I'm just going to go ahead and cache it. I know in the past it was recommended. I'm really not sure if that's still the case, but I'm going to leave it like that. And I'm going to get rid of this private keyword. I don't need that. I know it's private. I'm going to add a init method. So I want to inject some things. Oops. I want to inject some things into this class. I know that the scroll speed is going to probably come from outside this class. So for now, I think that's all I'm going to take is the scroll speed. And ultimately, in the future, I'm also going to take the terrain spawner because it's going to need to be able to notify the terrain spawner when it leaves the field of view, so the terrain spawner can create a new one. So I'll save the scroll speed into our local variable. Now in the update method, I'm actually going to move this. I like to put all the Unity callbacks up in the top. So, you know, he's going to need to get a reference to the level controller, because I need to find out if the game is playing. I only want to scroll the terrain if the game is playing. So level controller, and also in the awake method, now unfortunately I can't search for an interface, so I'm going to find the object by type, and then I'm going to get the interface off of it. It almost defeats the purpose of using an interface, but I don't know of really a better way to do this. So I'm getting my base class. I'm going to find the base class, which I know is going to exist in this scene. And then I'm going to grab the interface that it implements off of that base class, because I really only want to work through the interface. Okay. In the update method, I want this to be very descriptive. So I'm going to add a property here called should scroll terrain. And this is going to be, I'm just going to use an expression body method to say level controller is playing. I'm actually going to, just in case it's null, probably shouldn't ever happen, but I'm going to just check for null there. All right, so in the update method, I'm going to say if should scroll terrain, scroll terrain. And I'm going to put the private methods underneath the public methods. Get rid of that. Now, how am I going to scroll the terrain? Well, that's why I have the transform. Transform.translate new vector 3 scroll speed times time.delta time 0, 0. So what I'm doing is I'm translating the transform's position. I'm only transforming it on the x-axis, and I'm doing it by multiplying the scroll speed times the time that's elapsed since the last time update was called, since the last frame, basically. So time.delta time, I think I explained in a previous video, it's a way to smooth out things like this so that it's the same speed. It will scroll at the same speed regardless of how fast your processor is. So if you're on a really fast computer, it will scroll the same speed as it would on a really slow computer. So that's what time.delta time does. So just to go over the script, I'm caching my transform, I'm caching the level controller. Every frame, update's going to get called, and if we're playing, if should scroll terrain, which is going to be true if we're playing, then I'm going to translate by the x position. I'm going to translate on the x-axis by the scroll speed, adjust it by time.delta time. So that is pretty much it. I'm going to get rid of this unnecessary using. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go back into Unity, and I'm going to hit play. And if this is all wired up correctly, this guy should roll right off the screen. And there he goes. Perfect. Now, only problem is he keeps going. He ain't never going to stop. So I'm going to make sure that all my overrides are applied to the prefab. I'm going to delete this. And now I think it's time to start our terrain generator. So I'm going to create an empty here. I'm actually going to call it a terrain manager, because it's going to do more than just generate terrain. It's also going to spawn terrain, respawn terrain after it leaves the screen, and I may do some other things with it. It's going to also spawn things like craters, which is another type of terrain, but they're also going to be a hazard in our game. And I'm not sure if I'm going to use this class or not, but I'm going to definitely have some kind of manager to spawn other hazards like boulders, maybe some landmines. I'm thinking a laser turret or something would be cool too, to have something different. And enemy ships, of course, that will bomb the player. Okay, so what do I want on this terrain manager? Let's think about this for a second. Let's see. I know I'm going to want prefabs for the terrain. So I'm going to have to add serialized fields to it. So let's start by creating a C# script. So I'm going to create a new C# script. And I'm going to call this terrain manager. Open that up in Unity. In Visual Studio. I'm going to go ahead and move that to the minigames namespace. And so I know I'm going to want some serialized fields. So let's start with, let's see, I'm going to want prefab. So that's going to be a game object. Normal terrain. Prefab. And I always assign these to null so that Visual Studio and Unity don't give me compiler warnings. I'm going to want a serialized field, even though it doesn't exist yet, for a crater. And I want to know where to spawn the terrain and where they're going to roll off the edge of the screen. So let's give me some vector 3s. I'm going to have a vector 3 for left edge. And I'll default that to vector 3.0. And then another one, right edge. And I could use the camera viewport and just use some math to calculate this, but I'm lazy. And so what I really want to do is cheat and just use fixed positions from objects that I drag onto the scene to tell me where my left edge and my right edge are. And that way I don't have to do any math. I don't have to do any calculating. I'm also going to want a percentage to spawn a crater. We'll say 25%. And this is probably where I'm going to want to keep my scroll speed assign my scroll speed. At least the default scroll speed. And I think I'm probably going to want to adjust this scroll speed by... So in the original Moon Patrol, you can use the forward and backward button, or the joystick, I guess, on an arcade console, to go forward and backwards. And essentially, even though you're scrolling across the screen all the time, if you go forward, you scroll faster. And if you go backwards, you scroll slower. So I probably will adjust the scroll speed based on player controls. But for now, I'm just going to leave this set at -2. I think I'm going to need some private variables in here. I'm going to want to keep track of the last terrain object I spawned. And the reason I need to do that is when a piece of terrain scrolls off the map, it's going to notify this manager. It's going to say, hey, I'm dead. I'm gone. Spawn a new one. And it needs to know where to spawn the new one. And it can't just spawn it at right edge because this terrain is scrolling. And I need to add it exactly to the right edge of the last piece of spawn terrain. So initially, I'm going to just spawn from left edge to right edge. And I'm going to lay down all the initial terrain tiles. But after that, during the game, I'm going to want to find the last piece I spawned, and I'm going to spawn the new one at exactly its right edge, because these need to be seamlessly connected so that there's no gaps in between them. So hopefully that makes sense. in order to do that, I'm going to need to get the sprite renderer. I think I need to do that. And I'm going to have a little flag, max crater chance. Because I think I'm going to, I don't want to spawn 2 craters side by side. If I spawn 2 or 3 craters side by side, it might be impossible for the player to jump over them. So I want to reset, I want to start out, the chance of spawning a crater will be 25%. But then I want to set it to 0 when I spawn one. And then maybe increment that chance by some amount every frame, or every time I spawn a new piece of terrain. Yeah, so there's not too many craters side by side. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so what am I going to do? In awake, I'm going to set my max crater chance to be crater chance. So initially, there'll be a 25% chance. Now I'm going to want to have a method in here. I need to edit the default templates so they don't add those stupid private variables. I'm going to want a method to spawn initial terrain. And let's see, vector 3 spawn position. I want to start out at the left edge. That's where I want to spawn the first piece of terrain. So while spawn position is less than the right edge dot x. Actually, this has got to be dot x as well. So while our x position of our spawn position is less than the right edge, so I want to keep spawning until we're off the screen. Then I'm going to want to spawn terrain. Visual Studio thinks it's so smart. And I'm going to want to tell it what type of terrain to spawn. How am I going to do that? I'm going to create an enumeration. That's what I'm going to do. Yeah, let me create an enumeration. I'm going to call it terrain type. And initially, I know I'm going to want normal and crater. I think that should do me. So I'm going to tell it, I want to, for the initial blocks that I lay down, I want them to all be normal. Yes, I think that's what I want to do. And then I'm going to want to increment my spawn position. And I'm going to assume that this method in here, I'm going to assign that variable I talked about here, that last terrain sprite renderer. And I want to add to my X position the size of that image. Cool. Let's generate that method. Yes. I like that. So come in here. What am I going to do? How am I going to spawn the terrain? Well, let's see. First of all, I'm going to need a game object to spawn. Now, normally in a game, you would instantiate a type like our normal, like in this case, like say I said normal terrain prefab, and I would instantiate a new game object of that type of prefab. I'm not going to do that, and let me explain why. Because, well, one big performance issue in games, especially mobile games, is garbage collection. And every time you instantiate something on the heap, you're creating garbage. And then when you deallocate that, at some point the garbage collector has to come in and clean up all the garbage. And that causes performance hits. And if you're even playing a game and you notice a kind of hiccup and every once in a while kind of pause, that's probably because it's doing garbage collection at that moment. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my object pooler to spawn my objects. And I'm going to pool the objects of that type so that instead of deallocating them, when I'm done with them, instead of destroying them, I'm just going to deactivate them and keep them in the pool. And then the next time I want an object of that type, this object pooler will search the pool for it. If it finds it, it will just grab the first inactive object that it can find in the pool and give it to me, and then I can just activate it. And it's as if I instantiated a new one, but I'm just reusing and recycling an old one. And I'll show you that code so you can see how that's working. But for now, let me just do this. I'm going to spawn the game object. Now I need a terrain type. So I'm going to do a little conditional here. This should say terrain type. So based on my terrain type, I'm going to say if my terrain type is normal, then I'm going to use normal terrain prefab. Otherwise, I'm going to use the crater prefab. Now I'm probably going to refactor this. I'm probably going to write a method. I don't like this because right now I'm locked into just 2 terrain types. Now what about in the future? If I have more than that, I'm going to have to rewrite this code. So I'm going to refactor this. I'm going to extract this. I'm going to extract this to a method. And I'm going to call this get terrain type prefab. And I mean, for now, what doesn't it like about this? Oh. I'm just going to do a switch. This should never happen. So yeah, I'm going to get the terrain type prefab to spawn based on the type of terrain I'm getting. Now I can grow this as I need to in the future without having to write some nasty code in here. And that's pretty explicit. I like self-documenting code. Okay, now I don't want... See, do I want to go ahead and it doesn't matter to me if it's activated as soon as it's created. But one thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to get the ScrollingTerrain object off of this, component off of this. And I want to initialize it with the scroll speed. Now I know in the future I'm going to want to pass in, and it's a reference to myself, because when it goes off the screen, I want it to notify me that it's gone. But right now, my init method only has a scroll speed, so I'm going to give it the scroll speed. So I'm telling it how fast it needs to go. And I'm going to set its position to be spawn position. And I'm going to set my last terrain spawned to be this game object. but I'm not saving off that renderer. So I need to do that too. So actually, yeah. Do I even need to cache that? I don't need to cache that. Let me get rid of this. Will that work? We will find out. All right. So I think this is all I need to spawn the initial terrain and have them all start scrolling. And of course, I'm not using this yet. Let me go into Unity. Let me look at this. I need to assign my prefab. But first I need to assign my script. Terrain manager, okay. And go into my prefabs folder, minigames, and I want to go ahead and create a prefab for this too. Now come in here and I'm going to set my normal terrain prefab to there. Now I need to give it a left edge and a right edge. So let's go into my scene here, and I'm going to create an empty game object on the terrain manager here. We'll zero it out. And actually, let me just drag a piece of normal terrain on here. I think I want to start spawning it. Let's see, where's my camera view? I think I want to spawn it about there. So I'm going to copy this position. I'm going to go into my game object here. I'm going to call it left edge. And I'm going to paste position. And go back to my terrain manager, and then left edge. I'm just going to take that guy. Oh, it won't let me assign that to it. All right, so let me -6.38, -3.16. Okay, so I don't even need to keep this guy around. Let me take my normal terrain and move him to the right. I should just be able to go +6. Will that work? No. Well, I wanted to scroll off the screen and come onto the screen. So I'll put it all the way out here, 11.1. So delete that. Come in here, right edge, 11.1, -3.16. Let's see what happens if I click play. Nothing happens, and the reason nothing happens is I never told it to scroll terrain. So let me go into my Egg Patrol Manager. My Egg Patrol Manager is going to want a terrain spawner, isn't it? So come up here and create a serialized field, terrain spawner. For some reason, it's not seeing my terrain spawner. go. Oh, it's called Terrain Manager. Got to name it the right thing, Greg. Let's see, serialize field. Oh, I got rid of my Unity using statement. All right. Sorry for, I'm just being a doofus here. Terrain manager equals null. That will get assigned in the inspector. And so I'm going to actually, like I mentioned, I like self-documenting code. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to say if should start game. Or no, I just want to say start game. Okay, start game. Start it equals true. Play music. And I'm going to call spawn terrain. All right, let's see what happens now. Go back into Unity. Assign my terrain manager. Hit play. Whoa! Check it out. All right, so it gave me all the initial terrain. And you can see it's scrolling on by. So now we need to implement the piece that will have it despawn and respawn those elements of terrain. But one thing I want to show you first, I mentioned my object pooler. I want you to notice when I hit play, you're going to see something get created here called Do Not Destroy Unload. Don't destroy unload. So these are all things that were created and then had Don't Destroy Unload called on them. And this tells Unity, when I change scenes, don't delete these things. I want to keep these around. And so this is really useful when you want to use a singleton pattern, or if you, so for instance, on my audio manager, I'm using, and my object pooler, I'm using something called a singleton pattern where I have a single static instance of an object. And I only want to create that instance once. And if a new one, if I open a new scene and it tries to instantiate a new one, it will destroy that new one. And the original one is still there because it has Don't Destroy Unload called on it. And so what you're going to see is when I start despawning these, you're going to see them remain in this list, but just get deactivated, and then they're going to get reused. And so I'm never going to have more than, what, 7 of these terrain objects. And I'm going to clone thousands of them. I'm going to put thousands of them on the screen, but it's going to be the same 7 over and over and over and over again. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'll show you how the object pooler works, just very briefly. This is my own, I rolled my own. So this is a singleton pattern. I have a static instance on here. And the first time I come in here, if this instance is null, then I save off myself to it, and I call Don't Destroy Unload on that game object. So that's never going to get destroyed when I open a new scene. And so I only ever need to instantiate this once, and I'll always have access to it through the static instance method. And then if a new one does get instantiated, I just destroy it. Because this is not null, I'm just going to destroy that new one. So I'm only ever working with this one static one. Now, what am I doing in the object pooler. So first of all, I've got a dictionary here, a dictionary of strings to a queue. And so a queue is basically you push something on, you pop something off. It's just a way to queue up items to grab off like a stack. Okay, so it's just a collection that you get in C#. And that each queue will have a dictionary that will go from a string to another queue of game objects. So hopefully this makes sense. Basically, I'm going to have a queue for every type. So when I say give me a normal terrain, I'm going to go and see, is there already a queue for normal terrain in my dictionary? If there's not, I'm going to create one. And then I'm going to search that dictionaries to see if there's any items in there that are not active. And if there aren't, I'm going to instantiate a new one, and I'm going to add it to the dictionary. Otherwise, I'm just going to grab that one out. And I'll show you that in action. So when I say spawn game object, first of all, this should never happen. But if for whatever reason there's no instance of the object pooler, I'm just going to return null. Otherwise, I'm going to try and dequeue the prefab that I'm looking for. So I'm looking for an object pooler. And if that is not null, then I'm going to grab that guy. Otherwise, I'm going to instantiate a new one. Okay, so hopefully all this makes sense. I also added some methods to permanently delete items. So there's some games like my Asteroids game where I have a ton of objects I'm never going to want in any other scene. And so when that game is over, I want to permanently delete all the things that were specific to that game. So, okay. So here's an example where I say, give me a queue for this prefab, and then give me an object for that prefab from that queue. And that's either going to give me an existing one or create a new one in both cases. And then I just set it active to whether or not this flag is true. And then I put it back in the queue. So I'm popping it out of the queue and then I'm adding it back to the queue. I know that's confusing, and maybe I'll step through this code later so you can see it in action and that'll make more sense. But this is a pattern that's frequently used by game developers to prevent garbage collection from occurring. Yeah. Alrighty. So let's go back into Unity. Actually, I'm going to go into these scripts. I'm going to add some things. My terrain spawner, this guy here, he's definitely going to want to take a terrain manager. And I'm going to want to keep a reference to a terrain manager. And right now I'm not doing anything with it, but we're going to handle the situation where I roll off the edge of the screen and I need to tell the terrain manager, hey, I died. So he can get rid of me. Okay. And let's see. Going back to Unity, we're going to want to add something to let us know when we've gone off the edge of the screen. So let me grab my normal terrain again. And I want to make sure he's completely off the screen. I can't see him before he disappears. I don't want to ever run into a situation where it disappears halfway off the edge of the screen. So I'm going to set this out here, and I'm going to save this position. And I'm going to delete that. And I'm going to create on my manager here an empty game object, and I'm going to call this terrain despawn point. And I'm going to paste that position. Why is that guy still there? Oh, why is he up there? Okay, that was confusing the heck out of me. All right, now all I'm going to do is I'm going to add a box collider to this guy. Now I want to make him be on, I have a layer called waypoint. Now I'm not really using waypoints in this game. An example of a waypoint is in my asteroids game. I have waypoints for the enemy ships that spawn to go flying through space and go from point to point to point. So they come in like at one point on the screen, and then they might go down. Like it might come in the upper left edge, but then they're going to fly down to the middle and then continue on over. I wanted to have waypoints that I could randomly have them fly between. And so that's what I use these tags for. So I have a layer here called waypoint. I'm going to use that for this terrain despawn point. And I moved it over because I realized the box collider made it bigger than it was before, and that might cause my terrain to disappear before it gets off the edge. And I'm going to go ahead and fix this compiler error while I'm at it. I needed to pass in my reference there. All right, so the Egg Patrol, the terrain manager actually needs to take terrain. Actually, the spawner doesn't want it. The terrain wants it. And actually, all he wants to do is check for a collision. Yes. So I think I might also need to add a rigid body to that, now that I think about it. Yeah, I'm going to need to add a rigid body. So let me back up just a little bit here. In order to register a collision between two game objects, at least one of them has to have a rigid body. So hopefully that makes sense. So I'm going to take this guy, I'm going to collapse that collider. I'm going to add a rigid body 2D. And I want it to have no gravity. I don't want it to fall off the screen. That would be bad. And in fact, I'm gonna constrain it so it can't move or rotate, just in case something bumps into it. I don't want it to move. This just needs to stay there and register a collision if something runs into it. Specifically, if terrain runs into it. And so that reminds me, I'm going to need to go into my settings. Physics 2D, and this is where you define what can collide with what other things. So hazards should only collide with player bullets and players. Terrain should only I think terrain should only collide with players. And then waypoints, hazards are going to want to collide with the waypoint, and terrain is going to want to collide with waypoint. They both need to collide with waypoints so that I know when they go off the edge of the screen. Okay, I think that will do me. So let me come back into here. I've got my rigid body. I've got my collider. So I think I should just be able to go into my scrolling terrain, and I should be able to look for a collision here. On collision enter 2D. And I can even probably double check that I'm colliding with a waypoint. I think that would be a good idea. So I'm going to say waypoint layer equals layer mask. This is how you check to see what layer you're colliding with. probably should put that in a constant somewhere, but if collision dot game object dot layer equals waypoint layer, I want to tell my terrain manager spawn new terrain, which doesn't exist yet. Okay, and then I'm going to want to deactivate this guy. So I'm going to take my object pooler, which you remember is a static singleton, and I'm going to despawn this .game object. Now what that should do is it should immediately tell the terrain manager, hey, spawn a new piece of terrain, and then it should also deactivate this game object so he can be still in the pool but deactive and he can be reused. Now this method currently doesn't do anything except throw a not implemented exception, which is not what we want. What do I want to do in there? So I'm going to want to calculate the spawn position, which is a vector 3. And remember, we have a last terrain spawn transform.position. And I'm just going to increment its x by that last terrain spawned sprite renderer? Is that what I call it? No, I think it's just last terrain sprite renderer. What was it called? Oh, I made it an expression body method. All right, so I'm getting the spawn position from the position of the last terrain that I spawned plus its width, basically. I think that's all I need to do. And then I've already got this beautiful spawn terrain method here. And for now, I'm just going to tell it to spawn normal terrain because I haven't created the craters yet at spawn position. I think that's all I need to do. Let's go back into my Unity editor and hit play. I have an error. And what was my error? Object reference not set to an instance of an object. It doesn't think I have a terrain manager. Did I forget to assign my terrain manager? Well, it's not there. Well, in fact, it's not here either. Go back into my prefabs. When did I delete that? If you saw me delete that, let me know. Let's see. And this guy is going to need normal terrain. I think all this is still good. Let me hit play and see what happens. And it's not doing anything. Now that was working before. What did I break? Well, you get to see me debug. Let's see what happens here. Okay, so a left edge is not where it's supposed to be. Beautiful. I got to reset those guys. It was like -6 point something by -3 point something. Yeah, somehow I lost my... Yeah, somehow I lost that object from my scene. Okay, so left edge. Let's grab a piece of normal terrain. Drag it into the scene. Let's say left edge be about right here. We'll say, okay, -10, -3. I think that's good enough. Keep it simple. Nice big whole numbers. -10, -3. I will grab that. We'll say, might as well go all the way up to 12. Why not? 12, -3. I think maybe when I deleted that before, somehow I accidentally deleted this. And I'm going to save that to the prefab, just in case I accidentally delete it again. All right, now if we switch to my scene, you'll see that something's not working. It is not spawning the new ones, nor is it deleting the old ones. So here's my despawn point. It's got a collider, tagged waypoint. Let's look at these. They're on the terrain layer, so that should be good. So I think I need to look at my code. I'm not debugging anymore. Let me debug again. And in ScrollingTerrain, I'm going to want to put a breakpoint and on collision enter. I might not be getting a collision. Oh, I got a collision. Okay, so waypoint layer is -1, so it's not finding that in my layer mask. Why would that be? If I look at my layers, oh man, I misspelled waypoint. Okay, well, that's easy to fix. It's a pain because I don't want to rename that to be the correct spelling because I might break everywhere else I'm using it. So let me go into my ScrollingTerrain script, add a P here, come back into Unity and hit play. Hey, I don't seem to be running out of terrain. And there it is. You can see them. They hit this guy. They disappear and magically reappear over here. And if you look over here, you can see the one that was deactivated always remains deactivated until it's reused again. And I'm never allocating any more of these. And I promised you I would step through the object pooler code. That might be of interest, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. Actually, I'm going to step into it from here and from here. So we'll go back into Unity. hit play. Okay, so the first time I go to spawn terrain, okay, so spawn game object. So I'm passing in a prefab for normal terrain. Okay, so first of all, I have an instance of Object Explorer. That's good. So now I'm going to try and dequeue that prefab, but it's null. So now I want to instantiate a game object of that type. So I'll go into my instantiate method. So first of all, I need to get a queue for that prefab type. So I go into get queue. If the queue contains a prefab for that, then I get it out. Okay. So I already have a queue for that prefab. Now I return that. Then I want to instantiate a game object from that queue. I accidentally hit go instead of step into. I'm sorry. It's not stepping into my method for some reason. Oh, this is actually a, I was actually instantiating a game object for real, setting DontDestroyOnLoad on it, setting it to active, and then queuing it in my queue. So that's what I did there. So that's all cool. Let's let this run. And then we're going to hit a breakpoint when it goes to despawn an object. So I step in there. First of all, I want to make sure the object I'm trying to despawn is not null. And it's not. So I set it to false. That's all I do. It's false. So the object's still there. It's still queued in the object pooler, but it's just deactivated. And then the next time I need one, it's going to go find that deactivated one and give it to me, and I'm just going to activate it. So hopefully that all makes sense. It's just a way to keep from creating garbage on the heap and prevent garbage collection. So now that we've done that, I need to create a crater terrain type. So I'm going to call that crater. I'm going to reset that. Transform. I'm going to go up to my prefabs, create a prefab from it. That's great. And this is going to, actually, I don't want to do it that way. I want to drag my sprite on there like I did with the normal terrain. So I'm going to go to my art folder, go down here into Egg Patrol. I'm going to grab Crater, pull it up here. Cool. And I need to also, and this is what's going to be kind of weird, the crater is transparent. And so that would look really weird if you saw stars through it. And so I added a background. So I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to drag the background to it. Actually, I'm just going to drag that there. Will that work? Cool. And I'm going to reset its position, and I'm going to set its order in layer to be -1. And I want this whole thing to be on the hazard layer. All right, so I've got a game object with a foreground sprite and a background sprite. The foreground sprite, as you may recall, it's going to need a polygon collider 2D. And if we select that, you see I get this beautiful collider that conforms to the shape of that crater. So what will happen is my buggy will fall into that, hit the edge, and die. So that's exactly what we want. Now, what's missing from this? That's right. It's missing the script for scrolling terrain. So go ahead and create a prefab from that. Actually, it looks like I've already got one. I'm going to delete the old prefab. Create a new one. All right. That all looks good. I think we're good to go with that. So delete this. Go up to my terrain manager and assign that as the crater prefab. All right, so my terrain manager, it needs to know, we need to handle spawning a type of terrain. So right now, when we spawn new terrain, we're just spawning a normal one. That's not what I want to do. So what do I want to do? Well, I want to spawn either normal terrain or a hazard. So let's say get terrain type to spawn. And create a new method from that. Nice. Get rid of those stupid private keywords that I hate. All right, how am I going to handle this? Well, I know that I have a percentage to spawn a crater. So I'm going to say if, and Unity gives you a nice random number generator, so random range, and this is inclusive, so from 1 to 100. I'm going to roll a percentile dice as we would do in Dungeons & Dragons. And if that is less than or equal to crater chance, which you may remember by default was 25, then remember I also want to set that to 0 because I don't want to spawn 2 craters next to each other. Set that to 0 so the next piece of terrain I spawn will not be a crater. And then I'm going to return my terrain type of crater. Otherwise, I'm going to increment my crater chance. I never want it to be greater than the max crater chance. So I'll take that as my, I want it to be the lesser of these two values. It's either going to be max crater chance or it's going to be crater chance plus 5. I'm going to increment it by 5 per frame. So the very next frame after the first blank will have a 5% chance of spawning a crater. And I'm going to return a normal terrain. I think that should do it. So when I'm spawning new terrain, it's going to spawn it to the right of the last terrain that was spawned, and it's going to spawn either a crater or normal terrain. Let's see how that works. Uh-oh. What did I break? There's something that it doesn't like. There's no sprite renderer attached to the terrain manager clone. How did I do that? Okay, that was obviously not what I wanted to do. Go to my prefabs. Crater. I was trying to spawn a sprite, a terrain manager as a piece of terrain. That was totally not helpful. I should definitely be seeing some craters. There's one. There's another one. I'm just amazed it took me so long before I started seeing them. That seems to be an awful even distribution too. So that's something I can tweak in the future too. That's a little better. Okay, but it is definitely working. Ooh, so I go jump, jump. Nice, and I'm never getting two immediately adjacent to one another. Why am I not getting any now? There we go. There should be another one coming up. I think part of the problem is my right edge is so far off the screen too, so my initial terrain went a lot farther than it needed to before I first started seeing craters. Okay. I think that this may be a good place to stop. We've been going for a little bit more than an hour. Made some good progress. The next session I'm going to do, I'm going to actually add my buggy. So the artwork for that, I've got a car that I drew, and then I'm going to have the wheels be separate. Looks like I never imported the wheel. I'm going to have to go do that. But yeah, so the wheels are going to be separate because they're going to move independently like they're on shocks. As you bounce over the surface of the moon, these wheels will bounce independently of the car. And they're also going to rotate as the buggy is driving over. But I'm pretty pleased with this drawing. I've got a transparent, oops, went behind the camera. Got a transparent canopy, a ninja egg driving it. I got a gun that shoots up. I got a gun that shoots forward. Again, I'm not going for photorealism, but I think that looks pretty good. And I'll import those tires, which are going to just sit on top of the chassis here. But anyway, I really enjoyed this. Hope anybody watching enjoyed it as well. And if you did, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel. I'd really appreciate that. And if you want to be notified the next time I go live or next time I post a video, click that notification icon as well. So anyway, thanks so much for watching and have a great day.